share with my sisters and my brothers, and I thank God you all having a willing spirit to come let me speak with you, so I say thank you. Mr. Bora does have some handouts, but we're going to go on in the interest of time. When I teach a class to people, one of the things I tell them, I say, now, I like to start on time, and I like to end on time, because I know your time is precious. So we're going to go ahead, and what we're going to talk about, and hopefully she will be coming with the handouts, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. You know, last time we talked about colorectal cancer. Basically, that's everything in your GI tract from the stomach down. Today, we actually have two topics that we're going to talk about. One of them was head and neck cancer, and the other one was esophagus. So when you talk about head and neck cancer, you talk about everything from the nose right down into the base of your throat. So just this circle right here is what we're talking about with head and neck cancer. And when you look at it, as far as what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, is everything to do with the entire GI tract, how you process food. So we start off with the intestines, talk about colorectal cancer, but today, my part is that I'm going to talk about head and neck, chewing, your mouth, your throat. Mr. Bora, she was going to come and add on esophageal, and if she doesn't get here, I'll just cover that as well. But when you look at it, why is that important? When you look at the whole system in its entirety, and that's the other thing, when you talk about cancer, depending on where you find it, that's going to determine what you have to do to it. You don't treat colon cancer the way you do head and neck cancer. You don't treat esophageal or cancer in the esophagus the same way you do throat cancer. All of it is different. And one of the hallmarks of cancer is that you got to go in and get a piece of it to see where it came from. Because depending on what that cell looks like, depending on where it started, the other thing about cancer that'll mess you up is that cancer can start in one place and then it'll move. It'll spread. So just because you find a tumor in the stomach doesn't necessarily mean it's colon cancer. It could be something that moved from an ovarian cancer. Just because you find something in the lungs doesn't mean it's lung cancer. It could be breast cancer that moved to your lungs. So you have to find out where it started, because that is going to determine how you treat it. So that's what I'm going to kind of talk about why we're looking at this again. So we're going to talk about head and neck tonight. We're going to talk about esophagus. We talked a little bit about the stomach, but that's not one of the cancers that we're going to cover. But these are just all parts of the GI tract, how you digest your food. You know, there's some other organs in your belly and your stomach. You know, there's things like your gallbladder and your pancreas and your liver. That's kind of all in there. They don't touch food. They don't have anything to do with food. Now, they excrete stuff to help the food be processed better. Your pancreas releases your insulin. Your gallbladder releases that bile to help kind of break down and get the food to run. The liver has enzymes to kind of help you stay healthy as well. So those particular organs don't necessarily touch food or the food processing, but it kind of helps the process. So that's when you talk about the whole GI system, how it works. But the thing about head and neck cancer, head and neck cancer is just not one cancer, because there are a whole lot of different organs, a whole lot of different sections inside. Just this little spot from here to here, there's a whole lot of different sections in there, and every section is different. Every section is different. So it can start in several different places, and depending on where it starts, that's how you treat it. And I'm going to talk about those different places and the names that they give them. So there are multiple locations. You can have something on your lip. You can have something on your tongue. You can have something in your tonsils. You can have it in the back of your throat. You can have it in your voice box. So all of these things are different parts, and depending on where it is, you're going to treat it differently, and there's a different process as to whether or not you can screen for it or not. The thing about head and neck cancer that makes it really a different animal in my book from everything else is that when you talk about having some kind of cancer up here in your face or your neck, anything that you do to that, to get rid of that, especially if you have to find it a little later, if you have to do surgery, if you do chemo, there's a whole lot of stuff going on over here. So if you get treatment or having surgery or getting radiation or chemotherapy, It's gonna mess with how things taste. It's gonna change all that. It's gonna mess with what you can smell. If you got something going on in your nose, it's gonna change how you smell. The one thing I remember from COVID, I had COVID twice. The one thing that I lost was I lost my sense of smell for a while. I couldn't smell anything. And one of the things when you're eating, one of the first things you do is you eat with your eyes and your nose first. You see it and you smell it, and then everything just kind of kicks in. You're ready for it to get in your mouth. I couldn't smell. The good or the bad or the ugly, I couldn't smell. It eventually got better. It's kind of hit and miss, but it did get better. So you lose your sense of taste. You lose your sometimes sense of smell. Being able to swallow. If you got cancer, there's somewhere in the back of your throat, you're not going to be able to swallow normally. So what are you going to do about eating? How are you going to eat? What are you going to eat? How often can you eat? Can you eat at all? Chewing. It is along the jawline. You may have to take your teeth out. You may have to have surgery to take some of this bone structure out. So swallowing and chewing. And then, you know what, there's something else back there. That's your breathing tube is connected. It's kind of like this front part is where the food goes down. The back part is where the air goes down to go to your lungs. So they right there side by side. And if I got a tumor or cancer on the front side, which is where all the swallowing stuff happens, you know what, it could affect how I breathe. How many of y'all seen folks with a trach? That's head and neck cancer. So I had to bypass the normal way for somebody to breathe and put a tube in their neck because everything up here was kind of messed up while I was getting treatment. That's why they got trained. So that, and then talking, depending on where it is, again, you got a voice box in your throat. You may not be able to talk, especially someone that has a trach, sometimes they can't talk. So it's not a whole lot of real estate in here, but it's a whole lot of stuff that's right here between where your nose is and right there at the base of your throat. There's a whole lot of different functions that go on. So when you get a cancer in those areas, and while a lot of times there are some screenings for some things, you can screen your nose and your mouth and the back of your throat, but you can't necessarily screen down here in your neck. Just by going at somebody looking at you, there's not a real good screening tool for that unless you start having symptoms. So that is the ultimate problem with head and neck cancer. And again, depending on where they find it, it's got a different name. It's got a different name, it's got a different function, and it acts differently depending on where they find it. So why are we even talking about head and neck cancer? Well, first of all, it's not one of those cancers you hear a lot about. Within the United States, there are about over 70,000 people per year. But when you talk about hundreds of thousands of people with cancer in general, so that doesn't seem like a big number, but it's when you look at number 1 through number 10, it's in that top 10 as far as how many people get diagnosed with it. Most of the time you see this particular kind of cancer in people that are over 50 and older, but what we're seeing now with a lot of other kind of cancers, we're seeing it in younger people. We're seeing it in people that are in their 30s and in their 40s. So much younger people are being diagnosed with head and neck cancer. Within the state of Mississippi, the latest numbers that I can find were averaging somewhere close to 500 cases of head and neck cancer a year. Out of that almost 500, we're losing almost 140 people. People are dying from head and neck cancer. The other thing is head and neck cancer is more prevalent in men. Head and neck cancer is more prevalent in men. Men are more often being diagnosed with all these different types of head and neck cancer. So why is that happening? And remember when I said that they're depending on what place or what position or what location you find that cancer and it has a different name. So depending on where it is, the oral cavity inside your mouth, that's one spot. So you treat oral cancer different. And then you got something called at the back of your throat, they call it the pharynx. All the way to the back of your throat, all the way down to the voice box. There's 3 different sections in there. It's just this much room, but it's 3 totally different sections in that part of your throat. And depending, again, on where that cancer is identified or where it's found, then that has a different name. They call it nasopharynx, that's in the upper throat, right at the back of the throat. Then you got oropharynx, that's in the middle of the throat. You got hypopharynx, which is in the lower throat. then you have a voice box, and that's all in the space of 3 inches. That's a whole lot of different stuff going on. And all of them have a little bit of a different function. So in knowing that, then you got your nose. Your nose is a part of head and neck cancer. Also your sinuses. All of us who get these sinuses, living in Mississippi, everybody got a sinus problem. Everybody got sinus problems doesn't mean it's cancer. That's a whole different thing. Sinuses, and also, when you smell something good, when you start to salivate, you get all those secretions in your mouth. Your salivary glands, the liquid that pours into your mouth when you smell something good. Those are part of the head and neck. So all of these structures. So now it makes sense that if you get a cancer in one of these areas, it's going to impact a whole lot of different things in your life. A whole lot of things in your life. And before I talked about your taste, your smell, how you swallow, whether or not you can chew stuff, your breathing, and also whether or not how well you're talking. And if you all have that particular slide, I'm on the slide that says types. It says types. That's right, where it says types. So depending on the location of head and neck cancer, that's going to determine whether or not you can actually screen for it, because all of it can be screened for. Some of it can and some of it can't. So you have to kind of, depending on where it is. So what are the signs and symptoms? Everybody wants to know what are the signs and symptoms of head and neck cancer. Again, it depends on where it's located. The signs and symptoms that you see with head and neck cancer, all those different spots that I talked about. And again, this is the slide that says signs and symptoms. I think it's probably like the fourth or the fifth one. And look on this, it looks like keep going one more. I tell you what, I'm gonna catch up with y'all. So go ahead and go back to that second page. Let's go back to that second page. When it says taking another look. Taking another look. It's got a picture of a woman who you see the whole GI tract. That's what I was talking about when we were having these conversations. That last week we talked about the colon. This week we're talking about head and neck. And Mr. Bohr is going to come after I finish and talk about the esophagus. And this is all part of the digestive tract. But knowing that and looking at that, and also going to that next slide about head and neck cancer, why is it different? How do the treatments affect a person? That's what we're talking about, the taste, the smell, and all of that. Already talked about the incidence and mortality, why you're seeing it, and it's such a tough disease because it can be in all these different spots, and because even treating it successfully, it can cause a lot of problems. Various, all treatment, for the most part, it's kind of hard to get through, but head and neck cancer treatment is really, really hard. So that's why you see that. And I talked about the types, the different types depending on the location, or whether it's in your pharynx and in your larynx and all these different things. And so all these words, like your upper throat, your middle throat, lower throat, your voice box, all of these things, every place that it can show up, it shows up different and it acts different. So again, now we're at the signs and symptoms. Signs and symptoms. So again, depending on where it's located. If the cancer or head and neck cancer is starting in your mouth, or the floor of your mouth, or your tongue, or your lips, you'll see like a lump or sore that don't heal. Now, all of us get them little blebs in the inside of your cheek and on your gums a little bit. That's normal. They eventually go away. I'm talking about something that does not go away, something that stays for weeks at a time, and it doesn't go away. It doesn't heal. It doesn't get better. It actually continues to get a little bit worse no matter what you do to it. That's the thing that I'm talking about when I'm talking about something that doesn't go away. The other thing is that it can be white or red patch that stands out. It's not the normal color of the normal lining on the inside of your mouth or under your tongue or your gums. It looks a different color. So it'll be redder than what you normally see, or it'll be white, almost like a blackhead. But it's on the inside of your mouth, that kind of white, pearly white. But it's not juicy, it'll be kind of firm. It'll be kind of firm. The other thing is unexplained bleeding or pain in your mouth or your oral cavity. Again, this is when you find these things in your mouth, on your tongue, or on your lips. voice back, nose, all these places that you can't see when you open your mouth. Because in all those places, it looks a little bit different. This is that sore throat that doesn't go away. And I don't mean for a week or two, I mean it'll last for months. It just doesn't go away. It's always a little bit tender, it's always sore, it's always consistently there no matter what you do. I don't care how many antibiotics you get on, how many times the doctor gives you antibiotic, and it doesn't go away. That's one of the early signs and symptoms. Difficulty or pain with swallowing, persistent hoarseness. And so I'm not saying if you get hoarseness automatic, I'm saying when it doesn't go away. That's the key to this. When those symptoms are lasting more than a week or two, and no matter what you do, no matter what antibiotics or what throat swallows and all this stuff that you do, and it doesn't get any better for weeks at a time, that's something you need to get somebody to check. And again, unexplained bleeding from the nose or from the throat. So last week, we talked about risk factors, and if you look at this slide, this next one, it almost looks identical to what we talked about last week with risk factors. There are a few things that are a little bit different or a little bit more emphasized when we talk about head and neck cancer. The first one, of course, is tobacco. Tobacco is huge when it comes to cancers of the head and neck and of the throat. And then excessive alcohol consumption is one of the big problems. People, when you see people that typically get diagnosed with these kind of cancers, not all of them, I'm not saying all, but a lot of them will have a history of heavy smoking or heavy drinking. The other thing is that they have a lack of screening, they didn't get screened. We're going to talk about how you can get screened in just a little bit, but then there's also something when you talk about some of the head and neck cancers that there's a vaccine. There's a vaccine for some of them, not for everything, but the cancers especially that happen in the mouth and the back of the throat, there's a virus that they can have a vaccine for that can actually prevent them from ever occurring. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So those are things you can change. Remember, y'all remember this chart from last week? Stuff you can change, stuff you can't change, and those health disparities, which are opportunities. You can, remember I said last week, you can plug this down for any cancer, for any kind of chronic disease, for any health-related issue that you have. There's some stuff you can change, there's some stuff you cannot change, but then there's opportunities for we can do better. So the stuff with head and neck that you can change, or that we should be trying to change, is tobacco. Having tobacco in your life in any form, whether it's smoking, whether or not it's chewing tobacco, whether it's snuff, whether you dip or whatever it is. You know, people put that pocket of snuff or tobacco down in their pocket of their lips. That is totally unhealthy. That is not healthy. It is not cute. And if you're if you're of an age that you're dating someone, or even with your spouse, we don't want to see you spitting in a cup. I remember my grandma. Now my grandma would go get that what's that, red dog? Red man. She loved to go get my chewing tobacco. And then have to clean out the spit thing. That was not my favorite time. But so some stuff we can change. When you know better, you do better. That's the thing. You know better, you do better. But I will say this again. People that smoke, that's a hard burden. Nicotine is very, very addictive. It's almost addictive as crack. People don't give it that same, but it's very addictive. Now, some people can put them down and walk away and they're good. Some people, everybody can't. There are things in place that will help people stop smoking, but we need to encourage people, not necessarily get down, or we need to, it would be nice if we stop smoking, but we need to understand that that is part of it. So stuff you can't change your age, you can't change your family medical or your social history. We're going to talk about how some of this head and neck cancer is based on what happened to you medically, and when Mr. Board talks about esophageal cancer, some of that is medical stuff that you have going on that would increase your risk for developing some of these cancers. We've already talked very much so about health disparities, where you have different health outcomes based on some things where you're born, live, work, play, and pray, that these things basically going to change outcomes. Depending on where you live, if you grew up in an area where everybody smokes and nobody told you that smoking is not good for you, what's going to happen? You more than likely are going to smoke. If you come from an environment that everybody in the house is sipping or drinking on something every night, every day, every weekend, everybody got laid out every weekend, you grow up in that environment, you think that's normal. You think that's normal. And so that's what you do. So those are what we call health disparities, growing up in those type of environments, and no one told you. Now, I'm going to say, my personal family is, I got a lot of alcoholics in my family. I do. So I was scared when I was growing up because I didn't want to act like that. So you, just because you have something in your family, because you have that disparity in your life, you can actually acknowledge it. It doesn't go away. Just saying that, you know who gave me my first drink of beer? I don't like it to this day. My grandmama gave me my first sip of beer. I kept begging for it because I thought it looked good in there. And that, y'all, just tell y'all now. Y'all remember that Slid Small liquor beer? I don't know why I remember that. I had to be about 3 or 4 years old. I don't know how, but she gave me some. I don't want nobody to live to this day. She fixed me. But that's the kind of environment that I grew up in. Or part of my growing up was around that. But I knew and established the fact that's not what I wanted to do. So just because you grow up in these areas, now some people need help. Some people need help to move beyond that. We need to understand that. And then I also still included that equal and equity, 2 different things. Means something being equal, everybody get the same thing, that may not be what I need. Give me what I need to overcome the barriers that are in my life. Give me what I need. If I'm sitting around smoking all day long instead of smoking all day long, help me get a job. You know what? I can't smoke while I'm working. Help me get a job. Educate me. Help me get into school. Show me a different way of living. Show me a different way that I can do that. And that's what I did. I found a different way of living. I found like, you know what? There's a whole world out there in books. There's a whole lot of stuff I can learn. And so when you expose people to that, instead of keeping them in those little trenches, you change the landscape. So this equity is what we're looking for. But getting back to head and neck cancer, talking about risk factors. We've already said alcohol, and this is excessive alcohol over a long period of time. Smoking, and this includes smokeless tobacco, snuff, and chewing tobacco, like I said before. The thing though is that when you look at risk factors, 75% of cancers that happen in the mouth and in the back of the throat are all because of alcohol and cigarettes and tobacco. Most of them in the mouth and in the throat, the pharynx. Most of those are caused, 75% of those are caused by smoke or alcohol. The other thing can be if someone at an earlier point in their life had to get some type of radiation to their face or head or neck or something, that also increases their risk factor. There's also some occupational things. You know, back before we knew better, people were breathing in a lot of these things. People that were in construction that had a lot of wood dust. People that worked in plants around a lot of chemicals. People that did a lot of food process, formaldehyde. You know, we used to use that stuff to kill bugs. You know, back in the day, the cotton poison, we used to put it in our houses to kill the bugs. We now know that causes cancer. So all of these things, so it could have been an occupational exposure. So a lot of times this is breathing in those things. Breathing in those things. So that's where you see cancers of the nasopharynx. So basically the back of the throat. You breathe them in, your nose hits the back of your throat. That's where those cancers show up. Stuff that you breathe in over a long period of time. Some of them also, though, are caused by different types of viral infections. There's one called Epstein-Barr. That's the virus that causes mononucleosis. Now, I remember hearing that they used to call it the kissing infection. That's not necessarily why you always get it, but it's called mono. Now, I heard mononucleosis. There's a virus that causes mono, which basically causes your lymph nodes right there in your neck to just swell up. But once you have that virus, sometimes you don't clear it. That's very rare. You don't see it that often. A lot of people don't get mono. But that's one of the things that once you've ever had it, it does increase your risk. But the one thing that we absolutely know know now that has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt is exposure to HPV, which is human papillomavirus. Human papillomavirus causes 60 to 70% of cancers that are found in the tonsils and also at the base of the tongue and at the back of the throat, the upper part of the throat. 60 to 70%. So if we know that this is the virus that's causing 60 to 70% of these kind of cancers, guess what? There's something now these other cancers, the smoking and all of that, the onus to stop those or prevent those or to stop those from happening, that's on the individual person as they're an adult. There's something that we can do about HPV that you can do for your children, even if you don't do it for yourself. So just to talk a little bit about HPV, what it is. HPV causes 60 to 70% of the cancers that start in the mouth, on the tonsils or the base of the tongue. The thing about HPV is that HPV is spread by any type of intimate sexual contact. Any type. And Pastor, you're going to have to forgive me, I'm just going to have to go there. People think it's always about having intercourse with someone. It's more than that. It's actually more than it. It's actually about oral sex. And then you expose yourself to that and you get it in your mouth. And it stays there, it doesn't go away. Now, you heard about HPV before because you heard about HPV with cervical cancer. With cervical cancer, you can actually check for HPV to see whether or not you're positive. But with head and neck or oral, there is no screening for HPV. There is no screening for HPV to check to see whether or not it's in your mouth or in any other cavity other than a woman when she gets a pap test. There are no other screenings that are done for HPV. So if we can't screen for it and we know it's causing a lot of cancers, that means we need to do something to stop it on the front end. The thing, though, about HPV is that it's increasing while most of the other types of cancers we're doing better with. HPV-related cancers are going way up because people have not paid attention to this HPV. And this is something that we can actually do something with HPV if you start early. So we're seeing that number go up when it actually should be going down. Now, there are different types of HPV. There are some high risk. When you look at it, there's like a whole slew of them. There's some of them that are high risk, there are some that are low risk. The ones that are high risk are the ones that end up turning into a cancer. And that's one of them is HPV 16 is the big one that really does it. So most people that are HPV positive mean that you carry or you're positive for HPV. The other thing about HPV, there are absolutely no symptoms. No symptoms. No symptoms of being HPV positive. So most people, though, that are HPV positive never develop cancer. We don't know why some do and why some don't, but some people never develop cancer. But it's important, especially because those kind of cancers typically happen at the back of your throat and at the first part of your throat, back there in the back. You can screen for them. You can look for that. When you're doing screening, they can look for that and see if they can cut that off. But again, remember, there's no screening. There's no way that I can do a swab and see whether or not you're positive for HPV in your throat. That does not exist right now. So when you talk about HPV-related cancers, HPV causes almost 40,000 cases of cancer annually. Cervical cancer for women, that's the one that everybody's talking about. We know that. We know we can do something about that. But other types of HPV cancers that we don't think about, vaginal, penile, anal, rectal, and then oral, head and neck cancer. So all of these different kind of cancers happening because of this one virus. So when you talk about that one virus, what about prevention and early detection? That's all I talk about with colorectal cancer. We find it early, we get it out, we get the polyps out, we're good. You never have to deal with it. The thing about head and neck cancer for prevention is that you want to avoid exposure. The first thing is that you, first of all, for everything that's non-HPV related, don't get back to HPV, but the stuff that's non-HPV related, we need to make sure we have a safe work environment. We have now a department in the federal government called HIPAA. It's workplace safety. It says that you have all these regulations in place. You have to have all these air filtrations in place. You have to have all of these things in place for safety in the work environment, because we have discovered all that formaldehyde and wood dust and all these other chemicals that were in the air that we didn't even pay any attention to. Knowing about the ventilation. How are you ventilating rooms? Or back in the day, you had this tight little room. You might have 10 people in that room working on these machines and working with these chemicals, and everything stayed in there, was really concentrated. So now we know to create and maintain a safe work environment, it's about ventilation, it's about monitoring, it's about having safety, it's about having your employees screened regularly. So that's one of the things that we can do for prevention. As for safe sexual behavior, the first thing, and Pastor, I know you're going to smile about this, is abstinence. It is a choice. It is a viable option to abstain from having sexual contact with someone before you marry. We need to teach that. Folks say it's old-fashioned, but we need to teach it when you teach. Now, being honest, most of us did not follow that rule, but you know what? Every day is a new day. Every day is an opportunity. It's an opportunity. So yes, we need to teach abstinence. It is a viable option. But in lieu of, or if you're in a situation, or someone that you know is in a situation where they're not practicing abstinence, then we have to talk about barriers. We have to talk about, first of all, using condoms as some type of barrier. Talk about abstinence always. I don't care where you've been or how you've been, you can start your life over. When you come into a full relationship with God, you can change behavior. You can change what you were and what you did. Now, you may still be a carrier, but you don't have to continue in that lifestyle. So that's what I would advise from prevention standpoint. But the big thing that we can do for this, especially the cancers that are HPV related, is vaccination. There's a vaccine. There's a vaccine. The other thing is early detection and screening. How many of you have gone to the dentist and after they clean your teeth, they put their finger in your mouth and they start running around and down and boom and lick your tongue up and they put their finger? They're screening you for HPV. They're screening you for HPV. When they do that, they're looking in your mouth, they're feeling on the walls on the inside of your cheek. They want to feel as though you're bumping your lumps in there. That's why they do that. Rub that finger around the arm. Like, what in the world? They rub your gums, and they rub on the inside of your mouth. They look up at the top. That's screening. Most of the time it's being done by our dentist or your dental hygienist is where they're doing it. Doctor can look at, they'll say, stick your tongue out, and they're looking at the back of your throat. That's what the doctor's looking to see if there's any white little bubbles or little places back there. He said, lift your tongue up, let me look underneath your tongue. That's what they're looking for. So that's what they're doing when you talk about the screening. Now, prevention. With colorectal cancer, we talk about prevention as far as getting polyps removed. The prevention when it comes to head and neck cancer, especially remember the ones that start early, the back of the base of the tongue, the first part of the throat, is a vaccine. It's called Gardasil. Gardasil is about cancer prevention. It's a vaccine that if you give it most appropriately at the time to start, it's just like when your children are being vaccinated, this is one of the vaccines they should get. It is recommended that you start the Gardasil injections between the ages of 9 and 14, and that's before there's any contact sexually with anyone else. Because a better time to completely eliminate HPV is to get this medicine on board before you're ever exposed. Because if you get this medicine on board, get these vaccines on board, if you're ever exposed to it, it will not take root. You cannot live. Because the vaccine will prevent it. It's kind of like the crazy man in Washington that stopped the measles vaccine and measles took off. But most of us, we don't hear nothing about measles because we took our vaccines. It works the same way. Your body builds up an immunity. It builds up your body before your body recognizes HPV and it will kill it before it ever gets a chance to take hold on your child. So if you have a child or a grandchild that's within that age and they've not gotten those injections, ask your doctor about it. And all insurances cover it. The health department has it, and they will give you those shots. Just just like they give all the other vaccines, it's there. It's not mandatory for school, but it's one of those things that you can request as a parent, or talk to your children or your grandchildren about, have you vaccinated your children for HPV? That is something that's really important. So knowing that, how you give Gardasil. Gardasil is given in 2 separate injections. You give one and then 6 months later, between 6 months and 12 months, you give the second shot. And they're done for the rest of their lives. Now that's getting it early, between 9 and 14. You can actually get the Gardasil injections up to age about 45. The thing though is that if you've already been exposed, it's not going to get rid of something that you already carry.